Hey, everybody, we're back with our friend Gabby, still with us this week. Hi, Gabby, by the way.
Hello.
Dr. Mike and Josh and myself, we've got 3 topics here. They're kind of like leftover topics, I guess you could say, from our news program earlier this week. They kind of deserve a little bit more time, and we thought we'd kind of stitch them together, Frankenstein style, into another show. There's really no common theme. Actually, no, I take that back. I guess 2 of them are on more or less on the same subject.
It's going to get everybody angry and lots of comments and engagement online.
Well, that's true too. But 2 of the topics are on the subject of sex and sexuality. The last one is, well, not, but we'll get to that last. But anyway, so let's start with a report that, this is the annual edition of a report that we see, every year. That's how annual reports work. And it's a report that consistently ranks Poland as like the worst country in Europe for contraception, access to contraception, which I've always found odd because every time I go to the supermarket or Rossmann or some other places, I see entire shelves devoted to contraception. So I'm kind of wondering, where this comes from. And the methodology here, it's fairly complicated. They take various things into consideration, including access to gynecologists and access to birth control pills, obviously, and access to the morning after pill, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, I guess, and discuss whether or not that's really contraception. But Josh, Gabby, Dr. Mike, when you hear that Poland is apparently a terrible country for contraception or access to contraception, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Whining wankers, if that makes any sense.
All right, what's the second thing that comes to your mind? All right, let Gabby answer that. Gabby, what do you think about?
The first thing that comes to my mind is I'm unsurprised, actually.
So you're like me, you're like, what country are you talking about? Because I see contraception anywhere.
No, I mean, I'm unsurprised that it is pretty bad.
You're not,
I agree with them. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, so you said you're not surprised. Sorry,
I'm not surprised.
I missed the nut. Sorry.
I am unsurprised.
You are unsurprised. You are negative surprised.
Negative surprise.
So you agree.
Informed.
Okay, so that's good. So then what do you have to say about my point where it seems to be the contraception is everywhere, freely available at reasonable prices?
It depends on the contraception, doesn't it?
Okay,
condoms are.
Okay.
But other stuff, contraception for women is pretty difficult to get in comparison to other countries.
We're talking birth control pills?
Birth control is.
Okay, how do you know it's difficult to get? Why do you say it's difficult?
Because I've tried to do it myself.
Well, you were refused, or you couldn't find it, or what?
One of the gynecologists refused on religious grounds, and it's also fairly expensive as well in comparison to other countries. I'm not saying in the UK, for example, it's free. The way you access it in the UK, you go to a family planning clinic, you say, I want contraceptives. They weigh you and give you 3 months worth or 6 months worth.
Weigh you?
Yeah, just to make sure that your weight is all right. Like you're not putting.
But they're just being nosy or something.
Yeah,
okay.
No, they weigh you. Like they put your weight down and ask you a few
questions. Fat, you're not getting laid anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, ask you a few questions, and then they give you 6 months supply worth, and it's free.
Wait, so this being the UK, you're talking about the NHS, which means it's taxpayer.
It's NHS.
So effectively, the taxpayers are paying for your birth control pills.
Yes.
But that's paying for you to have sex.
Yes, but you can also, if you're a guy, you go in and get condoms for free as well.
Which I'm also against.
It's equal opportunity.
Can you tell us, because I don't know, in Poland, roughly how much would you pay per month for birth control pills?
I don't know, because I haven't taken them for a while, so I don't know what the price is.
Anybody?
Now.
Dr. Mike?
I knew the prices have gone up. The last time I was involved in this, which, we're talking 10 plus years ago, it was something around ballpark figure 30 zlotys a month.
That's what I would guess. A maximum of 50. Let's say $10 a month. Is that
somewhere along those lines?
Okay.
The cost of like 2 packs of condoms per month, and this is the publicly reimbursed cost as well. Most of the girls that I knew that needed birth control, it wasn't an issue. They walked in every 3 months to make sure, are you smoking, not smoking, have you gained weight, whatever. It was more or less kind of a 5-minute doctor visit to make sure that they didn't have any of the risk factors involved, and they got another prescription for another 3 months. I think I knew one girl who once had an issue with a doctor who didn't want to give her the pill, and that was, to everybody's shock, something very unusual.
Gabby, do you respect the gynecologist's right to not prescribe birth control pills?
No, actually.
Because?
Why not?
Because it's none of their business.
Well,
it's not illegal, and you have the. I mean, if they're gonna deny you birth control pills, it can't be because they just disagree with it. Because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to be taking it. And if it's an issue like if they've done tests and there's some hormonal issue, or you're going to be ill from it, or it's not going to work for you, that's one thing. But
the Hippocratic Oath.
Wait. But what about Dr. Michael? What about her point that it's none of their business, and when you become a gynecologist, that's part of the job. Women are going to come to you asking for this, and isn't that part of your obligation, your duty as a doctor, to take care of your patients? And that involves giving them things like birth control pills. And most important of all, like Abby says, it's not illegal. So what basis do they have for saying no?
The fact that something is illegal does not mean it's immoral to do according to some standards. But the thing is, Hippocratic Oath, one of the first statements there is do no harm.
Where's the harm?
The birth control pills, it's a hormonal pill that you're taking for something that you don't actually need. There are side effects to any type of hormonal treatment, either way. I've known doctors that would not give medication for hair loss because I'm not giving you medication for something that you're losing hair. Okay, too bad. But this medication, although it might be unlikely, there might be some harm there. So I'm not going to prescribe that.
The birth control pills can be harmful.
Just like any hormonal treatment, it can have side effects. And the thing is, you do not need birth control because your other option is, either condoms or abstinence.
Yeah, but don't you make the women aware of those side effects and let them make the decision about whether or not they want to,
Well,
it's called informed consent.
Yeah, it's informed consent, yes. But in the end, you do not need birth control. It's not like if you do not have birth control,
you don't need breast enlargements. You don't need...
You don't need condoms either.
Exactly. Exactly. You don't need condoms, but you don't need a prescription for a doctor's prescription to get those condoms.
You're not putting anything in your body, really.
Of those scents do not give you any negative side effects. You might have an allergy to latex, but even then, gloves or touching something latex, whatever. The whole idea that we're talking about, the active and passive concept of, rights and freedoms and responsibilities. That doctor giving you that prescription is giving you access to a medication which might have negative side effects for something that does not actually improve your life. It does not make you healthier. It does not counteract any negative aspect of your health that's happening at the given moment. It's not that if you don't get these pills, you will be sicker, for instance. No, you're taking these pills because you do not want the negative ramifications of your behavior, which is wholly of your own decision, of your own choice.
Okay. I get it, but at the same time,
I'm not saying I agree with that completely. I'm just saying that if a doctor says he won't...
Let's be honest.
Be honest.
When doctors refuse to give you hormonal contraception, it's not because they think they're doing harm to you.
Because they have a moral opposition to contraception.
And they have a right to that.
Yeah, but they don't have...
And you have a right to go to another doctor.
Let me move on a little bit because we have a lot of ground to cover here. By the way, I should have mentioned at the beginning that the study comes from the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. Good business card, right? So I'm not sure what official connection they might have with the European Parliament, but I guess there's something in there. But anyway, I find it interesting that part of their criteria for measuring how well a country provides contraception, part of their criteria is access to abortion, which I find a bit strange because a lot of abortion rights activists are constantly saying, no, we don't use it as a method of contraception, but here it is as one of the primary metrics for telling you how a country rates in terms of access to contraception. So is abortion contraception or not? Because according to these people, they are obviously counting it as a very strong component of the study. So anybody thoughts on that? Is abortion supposed to be considered contraception or not?
No, it shouldn't be.
But
as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't be because it isn't. And to be honest, I think it comes across as dishonest, and it doesn't do the serious issue of contraception justice. To be honest, I don't like it when they mash two. Well,
it's a major component of this.
Contraception with birth control.
As we all know, Poland's abortion laws are very different than those found elsewhere in Europe, and I think it's largely as a consequence of that Poland finds itself rated last among European countries for access to contraception. So I think a lot of this has to do with definitions. We think in terms of birth control pills and condoms, where that are pretty much universal or de facto universal, whereas abortion is not. So that's the difference maker here. One of the things they mentioned, Gabby, in Poland is unreliable or uneven access to gynecologists in rural areas.
Yeah.
Something I find a little bit strange, because every country has rural areas. It's kind of hard to believe that, let's say, much bigger countries like, I don't know, Spain or Sweden have more gynecologists per capita, more, spread out evenly throughout the country. I don't know.
Well,
why Poland would be, Dr. Mike?
I think part of it is, from what I gather, is that a lot of the stuff that are routine for that gynecologists do here, you can get routinely done at the GP in other countries when it comes to things like contraception.
Oh, without seeing a specialist.
Yeah, without having to see a specialist gynecologist.
You don't need a specialist gynecologist here to get the birth control pill either. When it comes to access to gynecologists here in Poland, I can tell you from where I work, which is in contact with the NFZ, like the National Health Fund here, is one of the problems is most gynecologists here don't want to work in rural areas for the obvious reason, like, well, we can get more money and get paid more when we live in work in urban areas. And it's less of an issue of, women's rights, reproductive rights, contraception, and more of an issue of just, well, business is better in bigger towns than in rural areas.
And I'm not going to dispute that at all for obvious reasons.
It seems to be a reasonable argument, but that should apply equally to all specialists, heart surgeons and all the rest of it. I mean, who wants to live in the middle of nowhere?
If you're going to go for a heart surgeon, you're not going to go to a rural hospital, are you?
But if you live in the rural area, that's,
No, but you'd go to your GP and he would send you on.
Cow heart or no heart?
Exactly. But the point I was going to make was that for some reason in Poland, women do tend to go to gynecologists for things that could be done routinely by the GP as well. I don't know if it's obvious to them. Maybe it's they don't know that, you don't have to go to the gynecologist for certain things. But from my experience, talking to, Polish women, they tend to go to the gynecologist for things that in somewhere like the UK or somewhere like Hungary, you just go to the GP for. One
more component of the way that these things are kind of measured, and one thing that determines where countries find themselves in terms of, rated highly or rated poorly in terms of access to contraception, is the role of sex education. The report criticizes Poland for having a lack of reliable sex education. Gabby, you're nodding your head. I'm going to disagree with you, I think, but you go first.
I'm nodding in thought.
You think? Well, okay. So who thinks this is an issue here? Because I have trouble believing that in this day and age, in the 21st century, that really anybody doesn't have access to good sex education.
Is this possibly to do with the type of sex education that maybe...
You mean the content of the instruction?
Well, yes, maybe Poland's sex education is insufficiently, shall we say, modern in its outlook.
I didn't think there was any sex education in Poland at all.
Okay, here we go.
I mean, I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Of course there is.
Unless, you're learning
of course there
biology.
No, we're talking...
I don't know.
Dr. Mike, clarify this, because you're the only one here who's gone through the Polish educational system. When we talk about sex education, are we talking about the biological aspect or the social aspect of it? Or both?
The physical aspect.
I finished high school here in Poland, and they brought up interaction of the sexes here as in men and women.
The
and
social
the menstrual cycle... I think in the last year of high school, so, everybody was like 17 years old, and most of us that have already kind of experienced it ourselves.
So it's not going to be helpful, is it?
Exactly. But then on the other end, that was more, the class was called parental or family education or something along those lines. But, we're talking close to 20 years ago when this happened for me. But in biology class, we were taught about reproduction of sexual creatures, mitosis, meiosis, sperm cells. Cell division, and...
That's my contribution.
And for me, that's where school should end. The social aspects is something more that should be taught in the community or by families than in the schools.
Gabby, let me ask you that directly, and I think I know what you're going to say, but I'll ask you anyway. Does the school have a role in teaching the social aspect of sexuality, and if so, at what age?
I understand that it's a heated topic. I haven't actually formed an opinion on the social aspect. I think it's good to have sex education in schools, and after, say,
physical or social?
Physical,
okay.
After 11 years old.
The biological aspect.
The biological aspects that, you can get pregnant, and this is how it works, and this is what a condom is, and this is how contraception works.
Well, you're already crossing over social and biological there.
Yeah, well, I mean, Yes. But I think those are very important for the health of people, of kids, basically, to know.
And the social aspect of it?
And the social aspect in relationship forming, I don't know if that should be...
Should any teachers be showing, maybe using, reasonably graphic images, how to put on a condom, for example?
I don't think so. I mean, I can see the argument for it, and I know that, I think it's it's an area where you have to be really careful, because obviously there's lots of safeguarding to do for kids here, and you don't want to be on the wrong end of a grooming scandal. For example, if you've got I know some schools in the UK they were showing how to put condoms onto cucumbers as an example.
Well, I think about from time to time you see, for example, in America or in Canada, where a teacher encourages people, their homework assignment is to explore their body, for example.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Take photos and upgrade them.
Where that's it's a bit much.
It's got to be
graphic depictions of. And we're not even covering the subject of homosexuality or anything but conventional heterosexual relationships.
Well, you've got to tread really carefully. It's got to be age appropriate, right? But
what about parents who say it's not appropriate at any age? If you're in public schools, even up to the age of 18, it's not appropriate at all. Don't talk to my kid about sex.
I think parents should be able to opt out without any ramifications.
I think it's the other way. I think it should be you would need to opt into it. So the natural default is we're not touching this stuff unless the parents say they want us to.
But I completely get the slippery slope argument.
Josh, thoughts?
And I understand
I think that. I think at the very least in schools that technique that working women do with putting a condom on using their mouth should be more widely disseminated.
You're having
if that's not...
You're remembering some teachers from back in the day, huh?
If that's not the right verb, I don't know.
Nah, well, that's a good... Yeah. One thing about this report, though, I think it should be pointed out that they're kind of treating all countries and cultures equally. In other words... they're kind of suggesting that what, let's say, the Netherlands and Sweden do in classrooms, that Poland should also do. And if Poland doesn't do it, somehow Poland is deficient. And I think that's unfair. They're kind of assuming a uniform cultural approach to how sexuality should be taught, and it's not taking regional or local variations into account.
We are all individuals.
So people are different. So. Okay, so anyway, final word on contraception. So let's sum this up. When Poland is consistently rated as a very poor country when it comes to access to contraception, we all, except for Gabby, what do we think? Dr. Mike, you say this is unfair or what? Dr. Mike?
I think it has to do with definitions. You can buy it everywhere here, and it's not that big of a hassle to get the pill if you want to. It's I would argue it's excessively easy in other countries.
An actual woman sitting next to you using her own experience says differently.
Girls about this, and it was never an issue for them. It was the hassle was they had to show up every 3 months.
Josh, final word on contraception in Poland.
Yeah, it does sound to me like this is Poland scores badly because it doesn't fit correctly into the definitions that have been set by the people doing the survey.
Yeah, that's exactly my opinion as well. Gabby, I'll give you the actual final word on contraception to Gabby, Dr. Mike.
Yeah, thanks. I think the report has some merit. However, I do think it conflates several issues into one, and it needs to be sorted out because it makes discussion about it very difficult and causes more arguments than necessary.
Right. Let's move on to another separate report that we want to discuss, kind of sort of in the same topic. It's from an organization called Rainbow Europe. Maybe you can already guess what direction we're going to go in here. Rainbow Europe. And they rate countries in Europe according to how LGBT plus friendly they are. And it's a long list of criteria ranging from the legal environment to family policies affecting various kinds of families, the criminal code, how it punishes crimes against sexual minorities, the legal status of people who are transgender, the ability to change your gender legally, how easily that can be done or cannot be done, political asylum they give to people fleeing other countries because of their sexuality or sexual status.
And, also going back to the conflation they also talk about intersex as well, which is a medical condition.
Getting complicated for me already. Anyway, Poland rates, surprise, very poorly on this. Just 13%, the percentage. I won't get into the methodology. It's complicated. The lowest score in the European Union, although not the lowest score in Europe. Thanks, Belarus.
Finally,
exactly. And Russia at 8%, so even worse. But let's start big picture, and we'll get into details here. When you hear that Poland is criticized for not being as LGBT friendly as other countries, first impression, does this make sense to you or not, based on your many years of living here?
I mean, it makes sense for me because, like, basically every other Saturday night we go out with like batons and like whack on any gay people we see. I mean, we burn down houses. If we see a rainbow flag, we just use it as a noose.
Okay, you're joking, but plenty of people who don't have experience living in Poland might have that impression of people who do live here because of what they may have seen in,
Wait, wasn't the last
places.
episode I was talking about the gay bar I used to hang out at? Or did we say that off air about kids? Now I don't remember, actually, honestly.
I think we said it off. I don't know if... do you want to go... Okay, you know what?
That's one of my favorite places to hang out when I was single was a gay-friendly bar.
All right, so jokes aside, Dr. Mike...
That was 15 years, 20 years... Actually,
jokes aside, do you think Poland is hostile, or as hostile as this report would suggest, to sexual minorities?
I've seen more aggression along those lines in other places I've visited than here. But then again, I live mainly in Krakow, which is a young student town. But if you go rural anywhere in the world, you're usually going to run into aggressiveness, generally speaking. So I've lived in this metropolitan area, and I can compare it to other metropolitan areas, and I definitely don't feel that this place is in any way worse.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We've got to remember that Krakow isn't Poland, in the same way that, the UK isn't London. So,
okay, you're talking about the urban-rural divide, which applies everywhere.
Yeah, there's the urban-rural divide, but also the kind of city it is. It's a university city. There's a lot of academia here, intellectualism, as opposed to working cities. I think there's
also a lot of the correct meaning of begging the question in the whole kind of title and purpose of this survey. In that, is it something that's actually very important anyway? Of course, if you do form one of these minorities, you would probably feel very justified in saying, yes, it is extremely important. But the thing about minorities, of course, is that they are in a minority. And we are actually talking about a collective grouping of various different minorities that in themselves are really tiny minorities, and even as a collective grouping probably don't even approach 5 or 6% of the population. So I can fully understand why for that 5 or 6% of the population, surveys like this are very, very interesting and useful and worthwhile. But for the remaining 95% of the population, it's like nothing to see here. Move along, please.
I would also add, this is always my first reaction when I see these reports that kind of attack Poland for being at the bottom of this list or that list. I mean, I'm sorry, I have to point out an uncomfortable, but nonetheless, factual element to this whole thing. There are large parts of cities in other countries that rank much higher than Poland on this list, countries like France and England and Sweden that rank very highly. However, we all know that there are certain parts of Paris or Rotterdam or the English Midlands or places like Malmo in Sweden where if you walk down the street dressed as a flamboyant homosexual, for example, you're going to have a lot more problems than you would ever have walking down any street in Warsaw. So I think it's only fair to point that out, that it's hard to say that it's a Polish thing, because I don't think it is. And
along those lines, I would also say when it just comes to violence in urban areas in general speaking, if you take the worst statistics of being a minority in Poland in an urban area and you get, say, attacked, it's still less likely than being, quote unquote, a normie in lots of normal cities in Western Europe where you can get mugged or beaten up anyway. You're statistically more likely to get mugged or beaten up on a daily basis in London or Paris than being a minority here in Krakow or in Warsaw or in one of the worst rural areas to begin with.
I think you'd feel a lot safer here than you would, in some of the places that we just mentioned.
That's true. And it's interesting looking at the breakdown by criteria, because there are some things here that I think some things here that no one would have a problem with, or certainly Poland should be working towards. For example, if we look at some of them, I mean, they've got non-discrimination when it comes to employment. That's a good thing. But they don't have any of that when it comes to goods and services or education or health, which is not so good. And I think, to be honest, that kind of needs to be worked on. All of that stuff, fair point. But there's other stuff that's quite contentious, stuff that hasn't been resolved even in places, the progressive America or progressive UK. So I'm air quoting progressive because, we can talk about that, but So I think the list is very, very extensive.
Yes, almost too extensive.
Very extensive, and it does conflate again intersex, which is different to sexual orientation, which is different to gender identity. So
I think the list is so long that almost no one could pass the test, so to speak.
No.
And I'm looking at this map. It's an interactive
and would you
map.
Want to pass the test as well? That's the other thing.
Well,
Some of it
even
is-
bother taking
But
it.
they're setting what seems to be an impossible standard to gain their seal of approval. And I'm looking at this map. It's an interactive map. And I'm looking at countries that you would think would rate as highly as would be possible on any reasonable, list of measurements. Countries like the Netherlands or Sweden. Now, whereas Poland scored 13%, the Netherlands scores 56%. So again, I don't want to get too deep into the methodology, but if the Netherlands, could there be a country that has a more, liberal approach to homosexuality and how it's treated socially, legally, and culturally? And if they can't satisfy many of the requirements on this list, then who does? Let's be fair. Also, Gabby, one of the many criteria on the list is gay marriage, of course. Another one is gay adoption. And if you don't satisfy that, of course, it's very hard to get a good rating, so to speak. Poland has neither of those things and is unlikely to have either of them anytime soon, let's say. In fact, just off the top of my head, I can't remember which. There are quite a few European countries that you would think would have gay marriage that actually don't. They have like a hedge,
civil union or
the civil
something.
union. Actually, that might include Germany as far as I remember. Anyway, countries that you would think would have gay marriage really don't. They have like a legal workaround where they can, de facto it's there, but in fact, officially, legally, it isn't. But I don't know. These kind of reports kind of contribute to this, I think, unfair reputation that Poland is somehow this nightmare country for, homosexuals and just the whole, the whole LGBT, what's the right word? Spectrum community.
Well, one of the main issues that you had a few years ago were the quote-unquote LGBT-free zones in Poland, which was actually a campaign started by an LGBT group where they would label certain cities and powiats and counties that had merely, say, announced like declarations saying that we will only support quote-unquote traditional values or things like that. So they didn't. These city councils or regional councils didn't say that we are anti-gay or anything like that. We just said like, no, we will not support anything that isn't blatantly, say, pro-family or pro-tradition.
I can assure you, Dr. Mike, that 95 out of 100 people who learned about this outside of Poland through the media don't know that. They think
it was always
the city set up no gay zones,
or the city basically said like we will ban these kind of groups or these kind of people or these kind of institutions that support these kind. No, these cities at worst usually they had resolutions that had no legal binding authority. Said like we only promote traditional family
Well, look,
values.
yes, actually, this is. I know a little bit about this because it was something of an echo of a UK policy from a few decades ago, which was, I think it was the Thatcher government, which had, and I think on left-wing circles, it's kind of it's considered like a notorious and heinous bit of legislation, but it basically said that schools should not, when teaching sex education, promote the idea of homosexuality. And in fact, this is what is a very, very similar piece of legislation was adopted in this country. And so these so-called like anti-LGBT zones are actually places which are saying we are going to cleave to this legislation and not promote homosexuality and sex education for people under the age of 18. And that is the limit of the repression and prejudice. Now, you could maybe have a legitimate argument that, like, well, I think maybe children should be taught about homosexuality before they reach the age of 18. But that's an argument that stands or falls on its own merits. But I mean, when you say that probably 95% of people outside of Poland, when they hear about this, think that it is, these are places that are actively oppressing homosexuals.
I'm sure that's the case.
It's not only that, but in fact, I know many adult, well-educated people in this city who are Polish who believe exactly that as well. So, this is a misapprehension that nobody has made any great effort to try and
just incidentally,
clear up.
According to the results of this study, Denmark, again, according to these metrics they've put forward, Denmark is the most gay-friendly, LGBT-friendly country in Europe, but they rated 74%. And so if even the most...
73.
Look, 74. Even the most progressive, gay-friendly government culture on the continent of Europe still only satisfies 3/4 of the criteria. So I think, as I said earlier, these sound like impossible standards to
Makes
meet.
you wonder what 100% would be.
Exactly. Here's a surprising result.
I wouldn't want to live there, I suspect.
By the way, all the Western European countries rate in the 50s and 60s. Spain 62, France 64, Belgium 72. Although here's an interesting exception: Italy 25. Italy. So Italy only half as LGBT friendly, for example, as Germany somehow. Do we feel that? Does that match your general impression of how things are? I don't think so. So it just kind of adds to the confusion over how these metrics
Interesting.
work.
I'm just having a look. The Vatican City isn't on here.
San Marino is, strangely enough. Gabby, question for you. If some small to medium-sized town in Poland refused to give the necessary permission to organize a gay pride parade, for example, do you think that's proof of some larger anti-gay sentiment in the country? Put you on the spot here.
Yeah, you've put me on the spot. Yeah, I would say so.
So if you don't allow the march, it means you're anti-gay.
I would say it shows some prejudice. I don't, anti-gay can be anything, but it does show a prejudice if you're allowing marches for some groups but not others.
Did we not just kind of ban them for being tacky and tasteless? I mean, they really. I'm so over the whole kind of gay pride marches thing because it's not even representative of all gay people. It's representative of that small segment of the gay population that likes to strut around semi-naked with displaying their piercings.
It could be a freaking march of just porn stars and heterosexual stuff. I wouldn't want to see it either. I don't want that stuff celebrated either way. And the thing is, it's become less of a celebration of quote unquote like openness and freeness and more of a celebration of one sexual identity over another. It's like, this isn't stuff that should be public to begin with, no matter what way you're talking. It's like, we're fine, do what you want to do. It's just, I don't need to see a parade about it.
I'm going to put Gabby on the spot again. I'm picking on her today. If the Polish school system does not agree to have, let's say, certain books or materials accessible to younger students depicting homosexual lifestyles, is that also some kind of attack on the gay community?
Well, let's unpick that. What do you mean by homosexual lifestyle?
Well, let's say, books about two fathers or two mothers or that kind of thing.
Okay. I don't know. Probably. I mean, at the moment, you can't have, you can't adopt if you're gay. So I don't see like how niche it would necessarily be.
I just see some, I don't want to, I guess I'm going, I'm rushing into some deep water here where maybe I shouldn't, but
like you're reaching for some
my point is I see some parallels with the whole racism issue that baseless, ridiculous accusations of it obscure the sometimes legitimate cases of it.
I mean, I do think that kids need.
So when you're constantly talking about how you're under attack because you're gay, it kind of obscures the occasions where there really is some kind of malice.
There's a real problem with this kind of, I guess, American imported sort of...
Don't blame it on me.
Like this sort of American imported, very liberal, neoliberal, almost progressive...
Woke,
for lack of a better word, stuff, and actual issues as well. Like Josh was talking about Section 28 earlier in the UK and Poland, similar thing. It does cause problems for kids that are gay, because it's the thing about promoting is no one's really wanting to promote it, but kids do need to be told if they have certain feelings, they're not weird and they're like natural to have. And what you end up with is having kids who think there's something genuinely wrong with them when there isn't. So it's not a case of promoting. The language is inflammatory in and of itself, promoting homosexuality. No one wants to promote any lifestyle, but you need to let kids know that they're not weird for being the way they are, and actually it's part of the natural human condition. So
let's wrap this up. Let me go around the room with just a question to bring this topic to a close. Let's say you have a theoretical, hypothetical friend, lives outside of the country, is thinking about relocating to Poland. They are openly gay, and they ask you, geez, I'm worried. I read this stuff about Poland, how there's a fairly hostile cultural, social, political, and legal environment for gays. Should I not go to Poland because of this? What would your advice be to this hypothetical friend?
I would say absolute rubbish. Like all the gay people I know here seem to have a fine old time and don't have any. I mean, admittedly, most of the gay people I know are men, but they seem to be loving it.
Okay, Gabby,
I would say stick to the cities. I wouldn't go round flaunting it in the provinces just because you don't know what's going to happen there. But the cities generally are quite safe. And if you plan on moving here, forget about any dreams of adoption or marriage.
Yeah, Dr. Mike?
Yeah, pretty much more or less along those lines. Yeah, this isn't San Francisco. But then, from San Francisco, if you move to, I don't know, Kansas, you'd also expect some kind of changes in your lifestyle. But Poland is definitely not like Kansas. It's closer to San Francisco, oddly enough, if we're doing those extremes. You'll be fine here in Krakow. This is an old conservative city. Probably making out in a church at 3 a.m. might seem a little weird. Doesn't matter if you're making out with another guy or a girl.
Okay, thanks for the weird example.
I'm just thinking of that church next to that.
Let's not talk about. Let's not. So one last thing, I mentioned we had 3 topics today. Let's squeeze this in.
Yes, surprise topic.
Let's squeeze this one in at the end. Unfortunately, guys,
did you just say squeeze this one in at the end?
Yes, let's squeeze it in the end. Let's. Unfortunately, no sexual element to this one, although there is a gender element to this one. We learned this week that university attendance for the country is way, way down, trending down, and probably going to decrease even further. In fact, compared to a decade ago, there are about a third fewer university students nationally and about 40% fewer graduates. Now, a big part of this has to do with a demographic wave that hit about 10 years ago. There was just a lot more kids born at a certain time. They all went to university at a certain time. But the trend, very clear if you look at this convenient bar graph, graph chart thing. What do you call it? Graph, whatever.
Stuff.
This thing that I'm looking at, it's very obvious in the last decade, down every year, and the demographics suggest that it's going to decrease even further. Guys, if we take the baby boom element out of it, there's still changing cultural, social trends that kind of have removed the appeal of maybe going to university for a lot of people. What do you make about this? What do you make of this? And what's your explanation for why so many fewer people, again, a third, that's a massive decrease. What's your explanation for why so many fewer people are going to university now? Don't rush all at once.
The mentality has changed. During my parents' generation, 60s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s, going to college was kind of considered the next thing after going to high school. It didn't really matter what kind of education you had during the communist era. You would find some job somewhere doing something. So, going to higher education was just a way to kill more time. It really wouldn't change your impact on your earning abilities later on in life. Then in Poland, there was a time when being more educated would improve your chance of your earning potential. But I think Poland is becoming now like a lot of the West, where just because you're educated doesn't mean you're going to earn any more money, you're going to have any more status or influence. It actually has to do more of experience or your own abilities on what you can do, just like in the US. And I also have to say that in Poland, it was for a long period of time, since everybody had a college degree, it didn't really mean anything. I've been to so many job interviews where, you had to have a master's degree in something. It didn't matter if you were good in it, if you had any job experience. It was just kind of expected. And then at some point, people realized these people weren't better at that job or had any more skills. And that kind of expectation has basically just dropped off.
And people, I've been looking online at jobs and stuff, and employers do still ask for a master's degree or degree as a minimum. So I'm actually quite surprised, because they do, employers do require. I totally agree with you that a lot of the time it's kind of worthless, but I am surprised that it's less. Actually, I can't fathom a reason as to why, because of course education is free here.
It always amuses me whenever I see advertisements for proofreaders, and they, as a minimum, they want an English literature degree, and why on earth they would think that having a degree in English literature would make you qualified to be a proofreader or to be able to spell correctly or all of those basic things. I mean, without sidetracking too much, I mean, that is simply one of those things that you can give someone a test. You give them a piece of paper with text on it to proofread, and if you
proofread this, okay,
and which is exactly how I got started in it. And if you know how to do it, then you do it. And I think speaking personally, as someone who doesn't have a university degree and doesn't intend at this stage in my life to go back and pick up that missed opportunity, I think the whole business of a degree as a qualification for landing a job has become hopelessly kind of out of all proportion, really. I mean, there was a time when it was used as a kind of, shall we say, a dividing line between kind of sectors of society, because like in the UK, maybe, 30, 40 years ago, you had something like 13% of school leavers going on to university. So the having a university degree meant that you were in some kind of, it can be arguable, but some kind of top 13%, that you had a certain degree of, shall we say, academic or intellectual ability. But now you have a situation where you have something like 50% of people going to university, many of them doing degrees in subjects that not all of us might consider totally serious. And many of them, of course, because, 50% of the population is of below average intelligence. If you've got 50% of the population going to university, then, a large chunk of them are going to be only of average intelligence. So it doesn't really signify anything.
The governments everywhere. There was a famous effort in the UK, actually.
Well, that's yes.
Pushing more. Everybody should go to university. Everybody. And
to be fair, at the time, and I remember that. Yes, it was Tony Blair when he was elected
90s,
in 97, and it was his declared ambition that 50% of school leavers go to university. And I remember at the time thinking, what a terrific idea. We need to, education. What can go wrong there?
Yeah. That's when you think education means skills. Unfortunately, education now no longer means
exactly. And
it means being certified that you've completed studies, and that's it.
We're full of midwits, with like impressive letters after their names, and they can't string a sentence together.
Coming back to the situation in Poland with the decreasing number of university students, how about the role of an increasingly dynamic economy and the economic opportunities that people choose to pursue rather than go to studies? I'm thinking in particular of something we've discussed before in the field of IT, which is massive here.
About where I was, that's the topic I was going to head down as well.
Okay.
When it comes to IT, if you're studying that in college, that's a professor that's several years behind teaching you something that he's certified that will no longer apply once you get into the workforce. And most employers will be like, wait, you study this? I want you in the workforce already. This is something you should have picked up in high school and started doing as, a summer job in your late teens, early 20s. And I want somebody who's experienced and is up to date, not somebody who went to college and learned from a person that learned this stuff 10, 15 years ago. Of all my friends who are working in the IT field, I don't think any of them actually finished any of the courses. They might have started, but none of them finished.
And they're all making more money than the average college graduate.
Or than I am, yeah, exactly. And that's just the brutal truth. This is a kind of a field where you learn by doing, and studying it is great from an academic kind of theoretical standpoint. But when it comes to the applied aspect of it, or actually introducing it to real life and making money off of it, this is something you learn on the job.
The other takeaway from these numbers, interesting, Gabby, I want to get your take on this. Not only is the overall number decreasing, again, students and graduates, but there's another consistent aspect to these numbers. Universities all over the country, every region, the gender breakdown now in Poland is about 60-40, female to male. Now, that is a huge, huge gap. Earlier this week on our news program, we spoke about the gender gap here in Krakow.
Air quoted that, I saw.
The gender gap between men and women here in Krakow because of the Ukrainian refugees and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But universities, this is, again, all over the country, it's consistent. Women are 60% of all students. First of all, why is this? Surprised. And do you see a downside to this?
I'm not
because
surprised
I do.
Because I think this is true in most countries. I think it's the same.
It's increasingly female. Yeah,
intellectualism is increasingly female. I guess it's to do with going to. Well, women are told. Well, girls are told to knuckle down and study, and you'll do well. Whereas boys are like go and do the gardening, or do some sort of physical manual. Those kind of
actually be productive.
Yeah. Well. One can say.
Instead of studying sociology or something.
Well, instead of studying, yes. But I don't know what else to say. I was interrupted and I've lost my train of thought.
Anyone?
Sorry.
Well, why is it 60-40 women?
Well, this goes, I would say, going back generations when we start to apply the same standards to women as we used to do to men for generations, so that women want to be educated as well and take part in the workforce on an equal footing. But, men and women differ, so they went to different, sectors of education and society. And universities became more and more, humanities-based. So fewer and fewer universities actually teach, skills or applicable information that you can apply to a real job right away, while more, quote-unquote, humanities or intellectual things, which are more emotional-based or applied in a more broader sense. Mm-hmm. You go study something that generally benefits you, but you're not going to get a job because of that right away. And I think this applies very generally, broad strokes here, to women more often than men. So
it would be interesting to see if there's a STEM breakdown, like how many of those.
I mean,
how many of those women are in science, technology?
Well, this is one of those things that there's been such a huge
small minority, I'm guessing,
such a huge push to get women more into STEM subjects. And it's been that for 20 years, and they have, quote unquote, the same kind of access to it. But when they have the choice, generally speaking, women are less likely to go into those subjects. And then at the end, they graduate less often. So then 10 years later down the line, you have fewer women in research posts or science posts. They're still there, but there are fewer of them.
Let me introduce a different angle to this, Dr. Mike, because I want to get your take on this, and Gabby as well. I think this gender breakdown 60-40, this is a time bomb. This is a very, very big problem for other reasons, and I think it has to do with it's demographic reasons, to do with average age at marriage and average age at first childbirth, and total fertility rates and things like this, and it has a strong influence on demographics and demographic stability, and it has an influence on political stability. There's a chain reaction going on here because women, there's a name for this that I forgot. Women, generally speaking, and you can be offended if you want, but generally speaking, women try to marry up in the world, right? I think it's what's it called, hypergamy, something?
Yeah.
Okay, so women try to marry up in the world. And when a grossly disproportionate pool of women are better qualified, at least on paper, with university degrees, and they're looking for men that are, men to marry up in the world too, but maybe I said that wrong. Maybe that are even equally or better qualified. There's going to be there can be mismatches here. There are women for whom no suitable mates exist, or a much smaller pool. A much smaller pool of potential marriage partners exist, and this is going to.
You're sounding a little frustrated here. No,
I'm fine. But this is going to have huge social consequences. All these women with their degrees,
it's having impacts right now,
cannot find a husband with a degree, and they don't want a woman. Gabby, this is where I want your opinion specifically. A woman with a degree, especially an advanced degree, generally speaking, does not get romantically involved with a man who has no university degree.
It's true.
Sounds like a rom-com.
It's true, but maybe it's time for the roles to change. Maybe it's time for
Well,
men
you can
to
talk
marry
about
up,
changing human
men
nature.
to marry
I mean,
up, and then they can do the dishes for a change.
no, this is human nature. So, but you see,
We designed the dishwashers, for Christ's sake.
Dr. Mike, do you see what I'm getting at here? You know, you're going to have tons of women who are just not interested in the men that are, looking to get married because they say, look, I have a master's degree in this, I have an advanced degree in that, and you are a tradesman who started working when you were 19 years old out of high school. This doesn't work for me. And we're going to see a lot more of that as long as the university student breakdown is 60-40.
We've kind of skewed our expectations, both ways, for men, for women, and women for men. And this is only something I would argue that's happened over the last century or two. So we're talking not only just traditions, but just like nature.
I mean, since women got the vote.
Well, in Poland, women always had the vote. And this isn't about the vote.
Ooh, beat down.
This is basically just talking about...
Gabby, you want a bandage for that?
This is just about...
Let me go get some water for that sick burn.
Social constructs happening before even nation states existed.
Oh, you walked into that one so bad.
No, I lost my train of thought, so we're even on that point. But the dynamics of society have changed a lot in the last couple of centuries compared to the last 10,000 years. And it's no surprise.
All right, let's keep it focused on today, Dr. Mike. Let's not go back to the Ice Age here.
When somebody looks back on us in
Cavemen.
1,000 years, this will just seem like one more blip on the chart. It won't be. But to us here in the here and now, it seems like a huge upheaval. We'll deal with it. We'll be fine.
Can I add one more angle to this, Gabby? See if you're sympathetic at all. Let me play the victim card here for a second. I'm quite sure that if the university enrollment were 60-40 men, we would hear a lot about discrimination, access to higher education, how hard it is to be a woman.
That was in the U.S.
Et cetera. So why aren't we hearing
Sometimes
this?
it's
Why
hard.
aren't we hearing this about, why aren't we more concerned about boys and males of a certain age and why they're not interested in continuing their education?
I don't know why no one's concerned about that, but I think it's a serious concern. There's no reason at all why men can't be intellectuals.
But
let's not equate intellectual universities.
I'm tongue in cheek here, obviously.
Are you sure? Okay.
I think it's sad to say. I think it's a fact that kind of increasing numbers of men are waking up to the fact that wasting 3 years at university with a piece of paper is a total bag of shite, and you want to get on with making a living, which to some extent kind of deflates your earlier point about this whole hypergamy or marrying up thing, because I suspect that no matter how many letters after her name she's got, a woman who is kind of motivated by the idea of marrying up is probably going to look it up in terms of how big the house and the garage are, rather than how many letters husband-to-be has after his name.
True. I think that's true, to be honest.
So, and you could also, and I mean, this is on much more dodgy territory, but you could make the slightly possibly spurious argument that a lot of these degrees are in subjects that are of not any great relevance, and that some, but by no means all women, are in a position to be able to afford, in terms of their expectations from life, to be able to indulge 3 years in a subject purely out of interest, as opposed to the necessity to make a career and earn a good living out of
It
it.
applies to a lot of degrees. Doesn't matter if it's men or women studying it. That a lot of people go to tertiary education to get a degree that, it's fun, it's great, and you just spend $50,000, $100,000 in a degree that
Intersectional medieval poetry.
Ah, come on, you can go more, like art history, for example. I mean, a very, very interesting subject. But to be honest, if you have a degree in art history, then you can
end up working for a women's rights charity.
You can teach art history at a university, or you can write books about art history.
To get a job from after a philosophy degree was your philosophy teacher. Yeah.
Actually, that's not a joke. I know someone who did a degree in art history, and she works for a women's rights charity. So
you know what? I wanted to cut it off after that. Let me just add one thing since you mentioned that. Whether it's art history or medieval intersectional poetry or psychology, we always make fun of psychology majors and sociology. You know what? Knock yourself out. Do what you want. My problem is when you look for the government to pay for it. And in Poland, where higher education is free, I don't think it's unreasonable for the government to say, you know what, we have enough psychology graduates. We're going to dial this back, and we're going to reduce the number. We're going to reduce the number of openings this year.
I think
we're going to promote. We want you to study engineering and chemistry and business and, well, maybe not business, accounting, whatever. And, we're okay with anthropology. We've got our quota set for the next 10 years. And when the government pays for it, I think the taxpayer should have a voice, have some input into, what we promote and what we discourage.
I think the whole world needs to kind of get to grips with the fact that university degrees do not mean necessarily that you are skilled, and that they are overrated. However, I do also think that adult education is very important. There's no reason why you can't go and learn a skill, work, and then have free adult education at the weekends or something to, expand your ability. There's no reason why it should, because it is important for society to have an educated workforce and an educating voting pool. It's very important. I don't know if university degrees should be as relevant to, say, office working and all of that stuff than they are at the moment, So,
I agree with you completely there. Yeah.
Well, I think we've solved all the world's problems in this episode, from contraception to gay rights and women in the university. Wow, we covered a lot of ground here. Oh, okay, I feel better. All right, well, if anybody's still listening, thanks for getting this far. You deserve a medal. KrakCast.pl, of course, is the site. Check out all of our back episodes. Thanks to Gabby once again for stopping by.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thanks to everybody.
So gracious.
Everybody for listening. And we'll see you next time on the KrakCast.